All right, so there was a post on Instagram recently, a little bit of back and forth between Atlas Power Shrugged and another guy. I don't know how to pronounce his name, Runvus or something. I don't follow him, but I did see a couple of his videos that Atlas was talking about or that they went back and forth on. And it just reminded me, this back and forth, that so many people are out of touch with what natural lifters actually want to get out of training and why they remain natural in the first place. There's this whole sentiment that people that lift naturally are just somehow afraid to take gear, or they're jealous of people that are on gear, and it's wild to step out of the natural community and just remember that the fitness industry as a whole is this massive echo chamber of gear users. And it really put me back into how the fitness industry used to feel like 4, 5, 6+ years ago. So I wanted to use this kind of refresher that I had as an opportunity to discuss why people say stay natural, because clearly so many people are out of touch with it. So this post isn't to respond to either Atlas or the other guy. I'm not calling anybody out directly. This is more just broad picture since the topic was brought up and it kind of jogged my memory on this whole topic in the first place. So what I want to do today is go through a couple different chapters, a couple different observations that I've had in my time lifting and being involved in the fitness industry. First, I want to give an intro. There's going to be 3 main topics or 3 main chapters, you could say, that I'm going to talk about today. The first one's going to be shifting the Overton window and how gear users tend to do this within the fitness industry. The second one is going to be how these gear users and just lifters in general tend to lose touch with reality the more time they spend in the fitness industry. And finally, the last one I want to talk about is how they seek justification for their gear use and how they interact with naturals or people that do prefer to stay natural. So basically the topic of today's video is being anti-gear just a cope for being afraid to take gear, being afraid of needles, being afraid of side effects? It's a common assumption of people on gear. They think people like me are just afraid of needles and like that's the reason why I'm natural. But like I said in the beginning of this video, that is extremely out of touch. So I figured it would be a good opportunity to just actually explain my reasoning, and I think I can speak on behalf of a lot of people and hopefully help some people in the process that haven't heard someone like myself speak about it actually stay natural and feel convicted in their own instincts. So basically, I'm not trying to call anybody out, but I just want to clarify this for naturals. So when you come into this fitness industry, there are going to be some dynamics between natural lifters and gear users. I just want to say that natural and staying natural, not taking an external drug to increase your rate of muscle growth in the gym, is default. And this is confirmed by instinct and preference when you are in good physical and mental health. Before you get involved with the fitness industry, before you see people on gear, before you know what gear is, you instinctually prefer the natural look. If you look at somebody like Steve Reeves, I'd say for most people that aren't even in the gym yet or people that are just getting into it, that's probably too extreme for most people. Over time, they develop body dysmorphia, and these freak physiques that are people on gear tend to distort people's perception of reality. So you can see physique inflation, body dysmorphia. This increases for so many people over time, and eventually they change their preferences kind of without deciding to do that voluntarily. Next, gear users tend to justify poor mental health and bad habits. They say things like, my body, my choice, or parallels to that. They say it's not that deep, it's not unhealthy, is another kind of scary recent one with gear use. They'll say it's actually totally healthy. If you're taking a few 100 milligrams a week, you're still within the natural range of testosterone, all these kinds of things, which is obviously nonsense if you just have just common sense. In my opinion, which I'll touch more on that later. They'll say things like, oh, I hopped on when my natty gains plateaued, and things along the lines of that. And then they tend to use their platform for social engineering, and they like to place themselves as victims. Like, oh, I worked so hard that I couldn't continue to make gains naturally, therefore my obsession for training led me to take gear. Or I'm free to do whatever I want, and you guys are all being mean for judging me for taking gear or something. So it's a lot of things along the lines of that, a lot of parallels with those things that I said. You've probably seen if you've been in the fitness industry for more than a few months. Naturals, especially newer lifters or people that are new to the fitness industry, they aren't aware enough to understand these subtle kind of manipulations in the way that they speak or the way that they shift what they're actually discussing about. Like, they'll purposely leave a couple factors out and talk about a couple other factors when it comes to gear use. And I'm not just talking like the physical things like certain side effects or certain benefits. They'll just disregard like health as a whole, for example, just to talk about muscle growth and act like that's all that matters, for example, just as a broad picture example there. So naturals tend to fall for their manipulations and their guilt tripping, and they feel virtuous to be tolerant and accepting to these people, because when you come in and you see somebody taking steroids, like, most people in a good physical and mental health state that are in touch with reality are like, that's kind of like a fringe thing. I don't want to get involved with that. Like, the gym bro steroid user stereotype is real for a reason. And then when these people kind of manipulate their way into saying, oh, it's healthy and it's normal and I just love training and it allows me to train even harder and push myself more, then they start to feel this kind of like almost empathy for them, and they almost feel virtuous for being tolerant of that type of thinking. So they're obviously the new ones, and they're going to be more susceptible to somebody that has been able to come up with these answers and justifications for themselves and project it onto their audience. They've been thinking about that for 5 to 10 years, right? So it's very easy to fall for that, especially when you're new to the industry and you don't have the confidence in your own instincts and beliefs. It tends to get overridden by people that have years of experience lying to other people that are just basically outward projections of lies they tell themselves to justify their gear use, in my opinion and in my experience. So they fail to realize that this tolerance and socially engineered respect feels good in the short term, but neglects the thriving of the community and the health of anyone who goes down the path of using gear, and it distorts reality in the process. The fitness industry is a PED echo chamber, to put it simply. And you can even just draw basic parallels, like if you are really good friends with someone, or if you're a parent and you have a kid, what is best for making that person feel good in the short term is rarely going to be better than just telling them the honest truth of what's actually going to be best for their long-term health. So as humans, it feels good in the short term for us to like be tolerant or be accepting of these kinds of decisions and all this rhetoric that you'll see. But in reality, if you want to have the true healthy aesthetic bodybuilding community thrive, then you need to push back against it, even if it's uncomfortable, and that's what I'm attempting to do here, at least to some extent. So with that said, for the intro, let's move into basically what I'm going to call chapter 1. So this is going to be the shifting of the Overton window. So what exactly is an Overton window? Well, I'm sure most of you know. For anybody that doesn't know, it's basically just you can picture it like this. There's a whiteboard, and across the whiteboard there's all sorts of morals or principles written all across it. Your Overton window is if you were to hold up your hands like this and you could only look through this little circle that you make here, that reflects what is currently socially or morally acceptable within the current situation. So, and when I say situation, I mean current society, modern day and age, wherever you live, etc. So let's say right now, gear use has been shifted to be morally virtuous because you're doing as much as you can for your sport, you're advancing the limits of the human body, and that's how it tends to be framed. Do you think that was created by naturals? Probably not. It's been the gear use that have shifted gear use from being bad for society and bad for health and very selfish to actually it's kind of moral. So when you're new to that, that becomes your baseline of moral perception or your baseline of reality, when in reality, that's not actually the case if you look at it broad picture. So that's my intro for this one. Why do naturals tend to lose the debate of staying natural versus going enhanced? Why do naturals in this fitness industry basically just get walked all over and made fun of 24/7? Gear users tend to use muscle mass as a red herring. This is kind of the distraction. They zoom themselves in way too much, and people don't see the bigger picture. They don't step back because gear users almost trap them in the debate of something that is, it's way too zoomed in. I'll explain what I mean here in a second. So for example, the debate always ends up being about building muscle. And it might sound kind of normal or common sense within the fitness industry, but I'll explain what I mean here basically throughout this video. It ignores the reason why muscle is important in the first place. This is their attempt to shift the Overton window. So when you look at muscle mass, black and white, gear builds more muscle. If you like building muscle, gear is therefore the logical conclusion to go to. If you love it so much it's your life obsession, then who cares about your health? It's all about muscle building. To give you a bit of an introduction, or kind of give you a little bit of foreshadowing to what I'll be discussing in one of the next chapters, if you were to look at muscle mass as just muscle mass on its own with no other context, then what the gear users say can be quite logical, but that's too zoomed in. When you actually zoom out and make the window bigger or shift it to somewhere else that is more suited in reality, I would say, you start to see that muscle mass and the appeal that muscle mass in an aesthetic physique has in the first place is an indicator of supreme health, aesthetics, discipline, genetics. That's the appeal of muscle mass. And when you look at something like steroids, PEDs of any sort, they come with side effects. It's just not realistic to have something that does such a drastic supposed benefit that doesn't come with the other side of that double-edged sword. It's always the case every time. If you have any pattern recognition, you will start to pick up on that. There's no miracle drugs is basically what I'm trying to say. The better a drug is, the worse the side effects are, generally speaking. So they tend to say, well, it's just about muscle mass, but I say, well, what's the point of muscle mass in the first place? It's to signal health, aesthetics, vitality. One word I'll touch on today is just aura, because I think it's funny all the younger kids are saying it these days, but it's actually pretty true in this case, and I think it's a pretty valid and relevant word to be using. So, be insecure, lazy, take gear, get side effects, gaslight yourself into not caring, shift the conversation away from health, mass, and aesthetics, and only into muscle mass or strength. That's the gist of what I'm getting at here. They also tend to appeal to ignorance. The example I'd use is there isn't enough data to prove gear use is unhealthy, therefore I'll assume it's healthy or at least neutral. And I think if you just use your common sense, every gear user is going to have some type of side effect, and it's going to show up at one point or another. And you might think these are kind of subtle side effects, like a little bit of hair loss, a little bit of acne, reddening of the skin, your head or face muscles growing. Like, you can just see them, and they don't look good. Like, there's almost a repulsive feeling that you get from seeing something like that. And I'm not trying to offend anybody or be rude. I'm just being honest. Like, that's honestly how I feel about those side effects. But if you're hyper fixated on just the muscle component, you tend to be able to override that psychologically, but that's also out of touch with reality. That's not how the default setting is, how it goes as far as humans are wired to think, in my experience and in my opinion. In their minds, taking gear is actually virtuous because the pipeline, you could say, or the funnel is another good way to put it, of the fitness industry has shifted the frame of their perception from gear being a shortcut to gear being virtuous, because now size is all that matters. It's willful ignorance driven by body dysmorphia within themselves or the person or community who distorted your perceptions. This is a large part of the reason why your goals or goal physique inflates over time. So you can see how they've officially turned gear use into something that's not just categorized into basically every other street drug out there. It's basically turned it into something that's not even neutral. It's apparently now virtuous. So you can see all of these manipulations. They start to add up. These people create their accounts. They tell their followers the same little lies and the gaslighting they tell themselves, and then you get all these susceptible new people with no confidence giving them social proof and backing them up and defending them. Sometimes parasocial relationships in some cases kind of accelerate or inflate those feelings, at least to an extent, and you can kind of see how over time something like gear use that goes from this like generally terrible stereotype in the eyes of most people to now like some virtuous thing in the modern world. So it's pretty interesting, and I think when you look at it big picture, that becomes fairly obvious. So these people, they also tend to imply that they kind of constantly imply everyone wants to take gear, and that's just not true. They'll say things like the only reason you don't take it is because you're afraid of needles. Like, there might be some people that are dumb enough to actually believe themselves when they say that, or believe that that's actually true, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, logically, when you really sit down and think about that, it really makes no sense. If you actually cared about building muscle that much and it was that important, you'd think that would override your fear of needles. So to me, that just tells me that there's probably a deeper reason than being afraid of needles, and anybody that says that hasn't actually thought it through. They're just trying to justify their own decision and attack somebody in the process to create an enemy in their own head to justify their own stance. The only reason you don't take it is because you're afraid of needles. Stupid argument, in my opinion. Everyone has thought about taking it is another one you'll hear all the time. That's also not true. It is more common than I thought. I thought there would be more people like me, and I'm not trying to like grandstand or anything. It's just that the honest truth is that I've never considered taking gear, like never, not once, because it has always been health first. So in my experience, in my opinion, it was never an option. It's not something I ever allowed myself to even consider, and it's not something that's ever appealed to me. If I didn't care as much about my health, or if I tricked myself into not caring about my health, who knows, like maybe I would consider it. So I'm not trying to act like I'm better than anybody or like somehow more like righteous or virtuous or whatever. It's just the way I am, and I think there are a lot of other naturals that are that way, because ultimately your desire for muscle mass is a desire to increase or to signal to yourself and to the world that you are healthy, you're a good role model, people take you more seriously when you look aesthetic and when you look healthy. It's a good aura, you could say. I'm going to keep using that word as much as I can to project onto the world, in my opinion. I think it's very masculine, and I think it's something that's sorely lacking in the modern world, and having the desire to improve on that is like a natural, no pun intended, healthy desire, and it's a healthy thing to chase after. So I don't think it's like extra virtuous or moral or righteous or anything. I almost think it's just kind of like, I think it's kind of a natural feeling is what I'm trying to say. I think it's more of an instinct than anything. They'll also say things along the lines of like, naturals are a cult, or naturals are like culty, or don't listen to like this cult of naturals. They tend to use that quite a bit. This is pretty insidious in my opinion, and this might be the worst accusation that you'll see. This protects gear users from being critiqued. This is just generally kind of like a libertarian-esque cope, where it's basically like any sense of standards or any sense of morals or authority or organization is just like fascism or like overstepping authoritarianism. So that just defeats the whole. At that point, it's like, well, okay, well, you can't do anything if any type of organization or authority is just like immediately the most extreme version of it. Then they're only talking and discussing and viewing their world and their perception in black and white terms, and obviously you can't really fight that unless you just explain the reasoning behind their own perception, which I'm trying to do here. They'll say things along the lines of naturals are jealous, which there probably are some naturals that are jealous, but they're also just, like I said a few minutes ago, if you're natural and you're truly jealous of a gear user and you value their muscle mass and their physique that much, that will absolutely override your fear of needles, right? So this one just doesn't add up when you think about it for more than 30 seconds, in my opinion. This, I would say, this whole naturals are jealous approach, or this train of thought, this is also projection. If these guys had what it takes to look like Steve Reeves naturally, these gear users, by the way, they'd never hop on gear in the first place. Taking gear is hyperfixating on one variable, so in this case muscle mass, to gain a false sense of respect for supposed mastery, which helps them cope with never being able to look good naturally. So to finish up this chapter, what I'd say here is, if you I'll put some pictures of myself or some videos of myself on the screen. I'll put some in like natural lighting too, so you can see what I just actually look like normally, not in some crazy down lighting or in a mirror or anything. If you don't look better than me in these videos or these pictures that I'm showing here, you have no right. You have no ground to stand on to tell me that I'm not taking gear because I'm afraid of needles. You couldn't even look better than me naturally. You think I'm afraid of needles, you're afraid to train hard. It's as simple as that. So that doesn't need to be expanded on any further. That's extremely straightforward, and I think when you frame it like that, it kind of adds up. Chapter 2, this is going to be the second part. This is the important one here, and it's losing touch with reality. That's going to be the main theme of what I discuss here. I hinted at it in this first chapter about how ultimately we're talking about muscle mass, and that's all we discuss in the fitness industry. But why? What's the importance of muscle mass? What does it signal? Why do we desire it? What's the value of muscle mass? That's what needs to be. We need to shift the Overton window back to those kinds of topics. So muscular physiques are captivating because they signal exceptional health, strength, and in some cases you can make the argument for superior and supreme genetics. I think those are important biological traits to seek after. Of course, genetics, you can debate whether it's something that you can create or something you're just born with, but generally speaking, if you have an excellent physique, that's going to be associated with strong genetics that are valuable. We have millions of years of biology behind us to seek out true health and vitality. Your instincts will always be stronger than some blood work test or just like short-term or even mid to long-term studies on gear use in the modern world. We're designed to have a vision for who looks healthy, who's somebody we can associate ourselves with, who's somebody that is worthy of starting a family with, and how do we make sure everybody's healthy. Like, we have millions of years of psychology and biology to seek these things out. And you can instantly tell how unappealing the side effects of gear use are. So I don't care what a study says or what your blood work says. You can just visually see that people that are on gear are unhealthy because the side effects are obvious. So how unhealthy they are obviously is going to be, it does require nuance. So I'm not just trying to say that gear is all gonna kill everybody in 5 years after taking it, but generally speaking, when you're seeing these side effects visually, I don't care what the science says, I don't care what your blood work looks like. When somebody looks visually unhealthy, odds are they are unhealthy. Simple as that. I honestly think it's just common sense. So don't lose touch with your instincts. The fitness industry does dilute your perspective, so you just have to be wary of that. Don't get caught in the echo chamber is what I'm trying to say here. Muscle matters because it signals, and all these words kind of overlap, but health, masculinity, or for women, femininity, being in great shape, those apply to each other depending on your gender. Aura, that's a hilarious word that I think is going to be funny and quite suiting for today. And honestly, a really good one is just vitality. Like, you can see vitality and you can see when somebody's unhealthy, simple as that. And I do think our instincts are just superior to like a blood work test or random studies on gear use. You can call me anti-science or whatever, but that's just the way I see it. I do trust my instincts quite a bit, more than most people in the modern world, I would say. Muscle mass and the way your physique looks, aesthetics, you could say, is a metric of this. But if you chase it at the expense of other components, it ceases to be a worthwhile metric. So if you're chasing muscle mass, but it's at the expense of your health, what is the point of the muscle mass at this point? There's really no point because you are completely imbalanced and you're lopsided. And I don't mean aesthetically within the proportions of your physique, but I mean in the actual purpose of having muscle mass in the first place. You're having muscle mass to signal health, superiority, strength, confidence, all those kinds of things. If you have the muscle but you don't have the health, what's the point of the muscle? Simple as that. Obviously, when you view the fitness industry or you view lifting through the lens of a bodybuilding judge, then yeah, you're going to be distorted because bodybuilding, it is an extreme. You're hyperfixating on one variable at the expense of others, and that's why you see bodybuilders die all the time. And then you see most other gear users which are just caught in the middle. They're not healthy, they're not vital, they're not projecting this almost like human beauty, and they're not quite that pro bodybuilder that's like gonna have a very short lifespan or potentially die in the process. They're getting all these nasty side effects, could still die in the process, or could have some chronic conditions that are produced through gear use. So they could have some just poor side effects that negate any aesthetics that they build. But ultimately, it's not a good path to go down, in my opinion. So don't chase one variable at the expense of others, and that's why I do believe natural bodybuilding, or just natural lifting in general, to be superior for the vast majority of people. That's not to say I don't respect people that take gear. Like, there are people that do commit to mastery, where they do have to basically sacrifice certain variables to master another, and I do respect that. So I don't have any issue with that, but let's not kid ourselves. The vast majority of people taking gear are not going to be pro strongmen. They have no desire to do that. They're not somebody like, say, Sam Sheether, who's another one that's, again, trying to be an extremely strong, if not the strongest person in the world. Like, those are people that are after mastery. Most people are not like that, straight up. That's very, very, very obvious. The fitness industry is a pipeline that takes people seeking vitality and has them hyper-focus on the variable of muscle mass and leads them to forget about the bigger picture. So I've talked about this one already, no need to expand there. Gear users will always be vocal on social media because they need constant validation from others to justify their usage, because internally something still feels off. So if you can take gear and you can stay underground and you can keep quiet and not talk about it all the time on social media, and you personally have a genuine justification for your use, like mastery, for example, competing in bodybuilding, trying to be the best of that, strongman, powerlifting, whatever, then like so be it. I mean, I'm not completely against just ultimate freedom or anything. Like, obviously it's a very nuanced conversation that I don't have time to discuss today, but that, again, that's not most people. So most people, what they do, they build up their social media following. They try and seem hardcore, virtuous, tough, masculine, etc. You can throw in any similar words to that. They use their audience as basically justification and constant positive feedback to justify their use, because they know internally they are unable to do that. And I think that becomes quite obvious when you see the Instagram accounts of most gear users, if you really think about it and kind of look into what they're doing. So gear is a shortcut to the physique, but the side effects, even the subtle ones, cancel out the physique at the end of the day when you truly look at it from a place of good mental and physical health. Whether we want to admit it or not, it needs to be taken into account, and it can't be ignored any longer. So we have to look at the big picture. I'm not trying to make it, and this is almost the way I viewed bodybuilding for a while. People would say, oh, well, it's actually about health. And I'm like, no, like, I'm not like some hippy-dippy guy that's worried about like health and eating greens and stuff all the time. Like, no, I love muscle mass, and that's my main thing. But when you actually think about it, muscle mass, like I've said a bunch of times already, it's a signal of health. So ultimately it is about health. And that's what muscle mass is. Muscle mass is health. It is vitality. And you are chasing health when you're chasing muscle growth. And to get the optimal amount of muscle mass as a natural lifter, you have to live a healthy lifestyle. So they're all very congruent, I would say. So I'm not saying you have to be like some hippie, like kombucha drinking guy that like does CrossFit or something, but muscle mass in natural bodybuilding is true health. And your muscle mass and your ability to train hard and how your progress is going in the gym is a reflection of how healthy you actually are. So the whole thing, it encapsulates quite a bit when you really think about it, in my opinion. Mentally ill, quote-unquote, aura, I'll say, is forgetting the origins of the desire and appeal for aesthetics and not following, I'm still a little bit blind without my glasses, and allowing that to be overridden by competition for size regardless of side effects. Like I said, too zoomed in. Is being anti-gear natty cope for being afraid to use needles? This is another one worth touching on that I've touched on briefly already. I would say no. 99% of the time, natural lifters are just people who haven't lost touch with reality and don't have body dysmorphia. The fitness industry is an echo chamber. We know it warps people's perceptions, so it's to be expected that a lot of people succumb to that and they become gear users after being exposed and wrapped up in the fitness industry for a long enough time. They get body dysmorphia. They follow people that use their own audience as a justification for their gear use, and they wonder why they feel much more neutral or positive about gear use now. And it's just this insidious it's this insidious cycle that keeps repeating itself. And it's kind of unfortunate to see. And ultimately, it's been getting worse and worse. And I find that when it comes to combating something like that, you can't just sit on the ground and try and tear things down. You have to not only go against it and call it out, but you have to build something of your own up. So I'm trying to do a little bit of both, more specifically build up natural bodybuilding. And I think we need more voices for it, is what I'm trying to say here. So anybody that has a voice, it's worth speaking up about. 10 years ago, it was basically just Alex Leonidas talking about it. Like, there was nobody else. So the few of us that have come along to further that message, it's helped the community for sure. Next point here, being afraid of needles isn't even a thing. It's a non-argument in my opinion. If someone's logic is that the slight scare of a needle overrides their whole desire to take gear, then it's clearly not that tempting or valuable to them in the first place. Touched on that earlier, so I'll leave it at that. Your physique is ultimately a status symbol for health. Your physique, aesthetics, and your size, plus your overall health, equals your aura, you could say. So when you have a lot of size and you have a big physique, but you have all these side effects, the side effects are negative and they ultimately put your aura lower. Lots of steroid culture is just side effect whack-a-mole too. You can see this if you ever like go on their forums or like go on their YouTube channels. It's all about like how to manage side effects, and like you take a drug to fix the side effect of another drug, and it's just this whole whack-a-mole thing, and you get a side effect from that drug too. And it's like you're just trying to cover all these bases and you just can't. So the whole steroid culture, in my opinion, it's just side effect whack-a-mole. Final chapter I've got for today. This one is chapter 3. This is seeking justification. Normalization of weakness is one of the worst justifications that I see for gear use. It'll be something along the lines of everyone else drinks alcohol a ton, does recreational drugs, everyone else is fat and eats a bunch of unhealthy food, so I'm no unhealthier than everyone else. If you allow society or your perception of society to determine your values, you've lost touch with your intuition and you are just a victim to whatever is culturally acceptable within that Overton window of where you live and what time frame you're brought up in. You're letting that dictate your direction. So you are basically just a slave to that, to put it simply. You have to create your own values, and whether a lot of people agree with it at the time or a lot of people disagree with that at a certain period of time or whatever, you have to be able to hold strong in that if you actually want to live in a way that you believe is the correct way to live. And I see that all the time. Like, oh, well, I mean, I'm in the gym and I'm working hard. If I wasn't doing this, I'd be out drinking and being fat and whatnot. It's like, well, you're creating a false dichotomy. There's no point in just pitting those two against each other when you could just be like Steve Reeves. Creating enemies. This is another one that I see all the time, and psychologically, when you really break it down and look into it, this is kind of the heart and soul of gear users on social media, in my opinion. This is where you truly see behind the curtain. This is full-blown mask off, but they don't even realize that. They create enemies. So gear users will label natural lifters, so just normal people that lift weights, as cultists, as Puritans, as scared of needles, as morally righteous people, moral grandstanders, things along the lines of that. So they're all these derogatory terms to make us seem either weak or obscure, or the worst one in my opinion is a cultist. If you say like natural lifters in a cult, I think you're totally out of touch, and you're not seeing that people can kind of see right through that when they actually want to. So gear users see naturals as threats to their identity. This is the big point here. They see naturals as threats to their identity, so their subconscious views them as an enemy, and then they treat them as such. And you see this in a lot of cases. This is basically just an emotional defense mechanism. So when a gear user wants to call someone that's natural a you're in a cult, or you're just being morally righteous, or you're a Puritan, or you're afraid of needles or something. This isn't even their conscious mind speaking. This is their subconscious. It's their ego that they're not fully in touch with that is telling them what to say. It's pretty much as simple as that. It's a defense mechanism. They have to create enemies to justify their own usage and their own perspective. And I think that kind of just sums it up. So when you see gear users attacking just natural lifters, that's the reasoning behind it in 99% of cases. They ignore legit reasons for staying natural too, which is the real kicker. They won't even admit, like, oh, being natural is superior in all of these ways aside from muscle mass. They just won't mention any of the benefits to staying natural. And you know that when these people have an audience and they're not talking about the benefits of staying natural, these people are just using their platform as an opportunity to look for external validation for their own gear use. If they actually cared about the people that followed them, they would be talking about the benefits of staying natural, and they'd at least give an honest perspective. And some people do this, and credit to them, but not everybody does, and that's why I think this is worth talking about. Few things here. When you're staying natural, risk management is one of the biggest ones. That is actually a sign of high intelligence. If you're natural, then odds are you have good risk management and you're intelligent. You have a high IQ. They know how to train naturally. That's another one. If you know how to train naturally, you don't need gear. Like, look how big I've gotten naturally. Look at these videos. I'll put these videos up on the screen, or maybe you saw them earlier in the video. Like, most gear users, when they hop on gear, do they look better than I do? Usually not, and that's not to brag, that's just to say that, well, I know how to train, so I just don't need gear, so I don't need to take an unnecessary risk. If you want to be bigger than me by a significant margin, then yeah, you'll need gear, but unless you get bigger than me and you decide you need to do that as well, and you can justify it and accept it in your own personal self, then yeah, I mean, go for it, but that's rarely the case. You can also, one of the other benefits of staying natural is, or not necessarily a benefit, but another perspective here is it's just people that think long term and people that have a long term vision. If I'm thinking about myself, and let's say I'm just a guy in my 20s and I want to look super jacked to impress as many girls as I can when I go out in the city on weekends. That's just it's kind of a naive, short-term vision. I'm not saying there's necessarily anything wrong with that, although I do think there are some major issues with that type of life and that type of philosophy. But regardless, let's just say that's how they want to live, and so be it. That's the way somebody wants to live, and that's their motivation to train. That's very short-term, and it's very focused on the self. But if you're somebody that wants to be, say, a healthy, strong role model when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and if you're natural, you can look great in your 60s and 70s too if you keep up with things and train properly. That's one of the best motivations, or one of the best logical reasons to stay natural, is to be a good role model and a good leader within your own family. So if you were to take gear and just blast a bunch of tests and trend in your 20s and 30s, are you going to be able to be like that when you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s? Probably not. And I'm not one of these longevity guys that's like, oh, well, I just train for mobility and longevity and I don't want to get as jacked as I can. Like, no, I still want to get as jacked as I can, but I can do that as a natural and not have it impact the back half of my life is what I'm trying to say. So that's, it's another false dichotomy that gear users make. They say, oh, well, I'm not one of these longevity guys. I'm not one of these like health gurus or like kombucha drinking hipsters that are like doing CrossFit or whatever, or working on their mobility. You can be an elite high-end natural lifter, and at that point, when you are an insanely jacked natural bodybuilder, you are going to be even healthier in your later years, unless of course you suffer a bunch of injuries from improper training or not listening to your body. So that's another one there that they tend to just look past entirely. Like, you never hear gear users make those arguments, and of course I can't say that as a blanket statement. I'm just making generalizations here. These people put their own justification of gear use over the health of the community. Rather than using their following as an opportunity to lead by example, they take advantage of the audience by using them selfishly to defend their gear use. They're seeking validation, not seeking honest truth from people who care about them. The projection and gaslighting. Somehow the naturals who push back on gear use are the problem, and the gear user tries to play the victim. And this is one of the worst cases, or one of the worst things that you see in this whole fitness industry. Gear users need social validation to justify their use in most cases. The average gear user, absolutely that's true. Which is why they always tend to discuss it as either hardcore or somehow like taking gear is like healthy, which is kind of an insane one that we're starting to see more, unfortunately, these days. And they do that to persuade people into believing that. If people actually believed that, you wouldn't need to tell them to think that. It's kind of the whole basis of propaganda. If you have to tell somebody how to think, then that's probably not the best way to be thinking in the first place. And of course, that is a way oversimplification, because that would basically just remove any need for philosophy or psychology or anything. But generally speaking, if you have to constantly tell people that your gear use is okay and you have to make constant justifications for it, it's probably just incorrect in most cases. Gear users tend to show signs of psychological addiction too, and I think this one gets overlooked a lot. This is usually along the lines of people who justify smoking weed or using nicotine, social media addiction, all of these like on the outside like kind of harmless addictions, but when you actually look at the impact it has on their psychology, you realize that they're generally going to be a slave to these. So even if the physical symptoms or the physical downsides aren't immediately evident, they are basically just picking a vice to become a slave to, and ultimately gear use, I would say, falls into that category, but oftentimes with much worse physical side effects than these few things here. It's along the lines of like the, I could quit if I wanted to, I just do it for fun type of mentality. It's basically just hedonism. You're getting the reward without the work, or at least the work becomes optional. So when you're on gear, it's already known that in a lot of cases you'll gain more muscle just taking the drugs than somebody that's natural and actually trains properly. So training hard becomes optional, and that basically being able to get that reward without having to put in the work is hedonism. That's ultimately what it is. It's very straightforward. It's like mindless video games or social media. It's, you get this reward, you get the satisfaction. You didn't have to put in any type of work to get that reward. That's what gear use is. They'll try and cover this up by saying, oh, you still need to train hard when you're on gear. And I would say, to make gains, no, you don't have to train at all in a lot of cases. If you want to become the best and you want to win a Mr. Olympia, then aside from like a freak genetic response or something, yeah, you generally do have to train hard, because now if you're on gear and training hard, then that obviously opens up or raises your ceiling of muscle mass quite a bit. But I would say, generally speaking, it's basic hedonism, and then you can get away with slacking off for a couple weeks, or you can get away with only training hard when you feel like you want to, only when you have motivation, basically. And this is it's hedonism, to put it simply. And then the last one I have is that generally you're going to see gear users tend to use their social media accounts for themselves. I'm not saying it's every time, and there is going to be some overlap of people that use it for themselves and use it for the community simultaneously, because I do think a lot of the time, if you are somebody that's like just focused on the audience and you're not actually focused on yourself, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. It has to be a good balance of both. Like, you have to lead by example, and that in itself can teach a lot. I mean, that's basically what influencers are. And there's a lot of, I would say, positive influencers that are leading a life that you can look up to and try and incorporate certain habits or lifestyle choices into your own life, even though that person's entirely focused on themselves and they don't really care about you directly. And there's also people that are trying to be community oriented or trying to like help you that maybe don't care about you or just don't really know what they're talking about. So there is going to be a lot of overlap here, but generally speaking, a lot of people that are focused on using social media for themselves might do it in very subtle and kind of manipulative ways. You'll see this with a lot of gear users. Like I said earlier, they use their audience to justify their usage. They try and seem like a good person, or they play up this like friendly, nice guy persona, and then you're like, oh, this guy's not as mean or anything as I thought he was. He's a great guy, and I respect him, and I justify his gear use. And they're using you as internal validation, basically. It's an external to replace the internal. So I'm going to leave it at that for today. If I could summarize the video and give you just takeaway points, it's zoom out. Don't just look at muscle mass as black and white. It's not just muscle mass versus less muscle mass. It's what's the point of muscle mass? It's to show health. It's to signal vitality, and it's to build aesthetics. It's to look great. Focus on that. When you hyper-focus on muscle mass via taking gear, you sacrifice the well-roundedness that the ultimate physique, which in my opinion is the pinnacle of natural lifting, you can't get that through taking gear. That's obvious in just what it's called, a natural physique, but it's also obvious in that when you take gear, you no longer have the proportions, you no longer have the lack of side effects, you no longer have that health that you can visually see that we have built up in our biology for millions of years, that we can all detect instantly within our own instincts that is all subconscious. So think about that. Recognize that a lot of gear users will use their social media to validate their own opinions rather than just to like help you or to like teach people about gear or something. And yeah, don't lose touch with reality. So remember what you want out of lifting. Remember that goal physique you came into lifting wanting. Don't let it get distorted by the echo chamber that is the fitness industry. And that's basically what I'm going to leave it at for today. So thanks for watching. If you have any comments or anything, let me know. I'll keep an eye out. And that's all I got. So I'll see you guys in the next one.